Boom.
There it is.
There it is.
Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our deck. You will hear Tracy and Daniel off camera here. To my left, there's Tracy's hand. You may have a Daniel sighting tonight, and I'm joined by my dad. There's Kelly, always off to the side. What's that? And a dog. We have a dog tonight, Scott's dog.
Welcome.
This is Travis Irwin, my dad, and Debbie Irwin, my mom, and you'll get to know them a little better in a moment. Last week, Ryan Murphy shared his story with us, and what a great story it was. We recorded that, and my understanding is that if you weren't able to watch it live last week, you have an option to listen to Ryan tell his story on the recording. So I hope you get to see that. We're recording tonight's as well. Next week, we're going to have Malchiah Newman, the Gospel According to Malchiah Newman. Some of you met her before. We had her on a few weeks ago. Malchiah suffered from mental illness for many, many years. And really, when she describes what her life was like, it sounds like hell. But then she reached a turning point in her life and received good news that changed her life. And so she's going to tell you that story next week. But tonight, you have my dad and mom. And I picked my dad and mom as guests, not just because conveniently they're here in Michigan, and I thought that would be easy, but because I think their story is a really important story and a really inspiring story. At least it has been to me, and I think it will be to you as well. So I'm going to give you the son's introduction of his parents here real quick and tell you why they're going to be sharing with you tonight, and then we'll get right into asking them to share their story with us. And so my dad is a minister in the Church of Christ, and has been for almost 50 years, right after they got married in 1973, right? They got married in 1973. In 1974, Dad began his ministry in Akron, Ohio. And they've been doing church work together all that time, and they are both retiring this December.
Yeah.
So, so we have two people who have given their lives to and ministry and to ministering to people, and I really think of them as a team. I think of them as a unit, because Dad was preaching and teaching, and Mom was running the church library and teaching classes and working in the nursery. Everything that Dad went through as the minister of the church, Mom was right there with him. And so they've really been a team in ministry all these decades. And so you'd think, well, what's the turning point in their story, right? When two people give themselves to each other and their lives to the Lord, it's supposed to be, everything's supposed to be great. Everything's supposed to work out. And I know from being in the first row on their lives, that as they taught me to follow Christ, I saw them following Christ, but then they ran into some rough spots in their lives. And they reached some points where they bottomed out, and they needed some good news. And so I want to share with you the story of two people who've given their life to Christ and to serving his church, and the turning points that they've had along the way. So are you all ready for?
Yeah, start with your mom.
Ready for this? Well, this is a team. This is a team interview.
We think a little different.
This is a team interview. So, okay, I want to start at the beginning. Okay, so I brought up 1974.
Well, January 75 is when we moved to Akron.
Okay, January 75. You met in what year did you meet?
72.
72.
72, and you went to Lipscomb for Christian education, right?
Mhm.
And at what point did the two of you decide, did you know when you started dating Dad that ministry was going to be his direction, or was there, you did, okay? So tell us about your early conversations when you were dating and getting married about ministry and church work.
Well, I didn't really have a clue what I was doing, but I did fill in for pulpits for little churches in the East Tennessee area and in the Middle Tennessee area. So that's nothing like full-time ministry, though. So she'd go with me, and we'd preach and meet the people. And when we were in East Tennessee, we'd go down to Chattanooga for the day and come back and preach that night. So we really didn't talk a whole lot about ministry itself at that juncture. We sure did as the time approached, especially December of '74 when I graduated. But then we started looking, and I started trying out at different places for full-time work. That took on a different complexion altogether. But that's what I remember. I'd be more interested in what she has to say about it.
Yeah, me too. Were you on board with this from the start? Was it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I knew he was a Bible major. When I met him, I knew he was a Bible major. And Bible majors became ministers,
So
And like he said, when he was preaching on Sundays, I went with him.
So was that exciting to you to be dating and marrying a Bible major who was going to be a minister? So you got married, and soon after you moved to Akron, Ohio, to the West Side Church of Christ. Your early 20s, right?
I was 18.
You were 18.
Well, she was 18 when she got married.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
And you were 20 when you were turning 20 that year in '75, or no? You were 20, and I was 24, going on 25. That's what it was. Yeah.
All right. So tell us about, you go to West Side Church of Christ. You're just turning 20. You're the new minister. Like, did you ever talk about like what you hoped and dreamed, and like talk about what you anticipated it would be like to work in a church?
Well, let me give you some background. My major at Lipscomb was church education. I did not want to preach. My dad was a preacher. I wanted nothing to do with that. Not because Dad had bad experiences necessarily. I just didn't want to do that. I wanted to do church education. I could do church education. I could be a bus minister. I could be a youth minister. So I was trained, and I was going down that route, even though I was preaching part-time at various places. So graduation time came, and I went to a lot of different churches. They wanted a song leader, which I'm not. And so a lot of those things didn't work out. It looked like I was not going to be able to stay in Middle Tennessee, and I wanted to stay in Middle Tennessee. A job in Lufkin, Texas, to be a youth minister of a large congregation. And then we also went to Akron, Ohio during the winter time and saw 40 inches of snow on the ground. And they wanted me to come up there and preach. And even though I did not train to preach, they invited us, and we felt pulled towards Akron. What is interesting is that when we drove up to Akron to move, I told Debbie, I said, we'll come to Ohio for a couple of years, and then we'll go back home. And so 31 years later, we came back home. And that kind of tells you a little bit how God operates. God has a great sense of humor. So, sometimes you have certain plans, but God is the one who directs your steps. And so we dreamed, we planned in our own small way, because it's one thing to sit in a pew and watch somebody like Adam. It's another thing to be Adam and be Adam's wife. And you get there, you get in that situation, and you know what you're dealing with, and you know some of the challenges. But we had dreams and aspirations. We wanted to start a family, and that's when you came along.
Yeah.
But once again, I want to hear her side of the story.
Yeah, those dreams and aspirations are what I want to hear about.
Okay.
So Dad just gave us the timeline, Mom. Why don't you talk about how y'all were feeling as you were starting your ministry?
Well, when we moved to Akron, when he got the job and we moved to Akron, we were excited. We were 24 and 20, and it was his first full-time job since we'd gotten married, and we were excited. And I think that Trav kind of had in his mind how ministry was supposed to be, because
Yeah.
He had watched his dad all the time he was growing up. I had the minister's wife when I was growing up was a real role model for me. I just really thought she was just the greatest. And so in my mind, I was going to be like her. You know, I was going to do things the way she did, and I was going to be like her.
Idealistic.
Yeah, very idealistic.
Yeah. We work with some very sweet people. Oh, just wonderful people. God's people are wonderful wherever you go, but they really wanted us to come. They were very, very kind to us, very good to us.
How would you describe the fundamentals of your beliefs at that time? Like, I mean, what did you believe about God, about how it works, we're going to do God's work, we're following Jesus. If somebody asked you back then, well, how does it work with God? What do you believe? How would you describe your faith at that time?
Go ahead.
Well, I grew up in a very legalistic congregation, very traditional, very legalistic. Didn't teach a lot about God working in our lives today. It was more rule keeping, and that was just kind of how I pictured faith and religion and church and all of that at that time. It was keeping rules.
Mm-hmm. And my background was conservative too, very traditional, and maybe a little bit rigid. It's interesting. We went to work with a congregation that had broken away from that. They had broken away from the ultra-conservative movement in Akron, and they had been marked for that, of course. But it was the beginning of a learning curve for both of us.
Yeah.
But we didn't hear a whole lot about the grace of God, and that was my fault because I was the preacher. So who could I blame but myself, right? Anyway, interesting experience.
When's the first time? So I know about Akron because I was born there, and I have good memories of it. Right. They were really good years for me. But can you tell us when was the first time that your faith was put to a test?
In Akron?
Well, just you go into ministry together. You're young. Was there ever a time where the two of you together ran into something that really started to test your faith? Or
not until we left Akron.
Not until we left Akron.
Okay.
Akron was very idyllic. I mean, from the church office to the house we lived in, the church building, to the people sat in the pews, the leaders. We started our family there with other young couples that started their families there. We had real sweet older people to work with. There was a time when I had a disagreement with the leadership. Once again, because of my idealism, and I drew a line in the sand, and that was a very foolish thing. It was a part of my immaturity. Was that faith trying? I just told the Lord, I said, I'm leaving. I'm out of here. And gave us pretty detail about that too, because God answers prayer, and He answered that prayer pretty boldly. But anyway, in Akron, we didn't really have a whole lot to try us.
So where did you get tried? Where's the first time you ran into rough water? Once you
rough water, we've probably been experiencing our second work. We went to a small church, an older church, a very traditional church in the hills of Monroe County, Ohio. It's one of the poorest counties. Well, not Monroe County, Harrison County. It is probably the poorest county in the state of Ohio. And they had been influenced by Daniel Summers. Daniel Summers was a off the chart conservative. He was anti-everything. If it breathed and moved, he was against it. That influenced the church in that whole area, the whole Ohio Valley, for many years, especially where we were. And they were anti-education, anti-evangelism, and that was a tough work. We had some really sweet elders. We had some really good elders, but that was just a hard work. You and your sister were with us. It was hard. We had left a very friendly, outgoing congregation and gone to one that was very clannish. The whole town was clannish, and in our thinking, and God forgive me if I'm judgmental, the thinking was very backward, very negative, and we didn't thrive in that. We were there 13 months. Every preacher, Adam can probably relate to this too. Every preacher has at least one Waterloo, where it's a misfit, and you go in and you, after about 2 weeks, you go, uh-oh. And that's what happened to us, literally.
Yeah.
The honeymoon was over in 2 weeks. Yeah, see, Adam's shaking his head. He knows what I'm talking about. And that's very trying to two young people that are very idyllic, and have two small children, and you're trying to pay your bills, and you think, what are we going to do? But we have learned God's got it. God's always got it under control. And we, looking back, we know that 110%. Back then, we weren't too sure. But
So it was in doubt. You saying during that period in your life, you had some doubts?
We had some doubts. We'd gone from an idyllic situation to a situation that was just kind of the opposite. Yeah. And I don't mean to be unkind. I really don't. That's not my intention.
Let's give Mom a chance to be unkind.
Yes, go.
If she
Please,
chooses. I don't think you've named any names yet. So
no.
What were you going through during that time? You left Akron. It was great.
Well, and when we left Akron, right before we left Akron, I had to have major surgery. And so the moving truck came, took the furniture away. You and your dad and your sister moved away, and I had to stay in Akron. And I had to stay there for almost 3 weeks. So when I finally got to Cadiz, that was not a good start for a preacher who's moving in and trying to get to know people and make a good impression when it's him and his mother-in-law and 2 little kids and his wife is not there.
Yeah.
And then when I got there, you know, I had major surgery. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't pick up your sister. I couldn't pick you up. I couldn't pick up a laundry basket. And so it was a real struggle. I can remember one of the first Sundays that we were there that Michelle acted up during church, and I needed to take her out, and I couldn't carry her. And so I'm dragging this child down the aisle to get out, you know, and everybody's looking at me, you know. Man. That was how the whole thing started. And it didn't get any better.
No.
It just didn't get any better. We followed a very popular minister.
Who's a good friend.
Who's a great person. And all we heard about was Tom and Nina. Well, Tom did it like this, and Nina did it like this. And, you know, it was just not a good situation.
Very awkward for us.
We had some people over to our home for dinner, one of the only young couples at the church, and we had them over for dinner. And during dinner, they started telling us about who didn't like who, and people getting in fist fights in the church parking lot. And it was just awful. It was just awful.
How did you, what were your prayers like during that time in your lives?
Help me survive.
Help me survive.
What were you hoping God?
I wasn't hoping God would do anything really, because Trav had told them when we moved there that we would stay at least 2 years, and I knew I was stuck there for 2 years. So I just needed to survive.
When I moved there and I got familiar with the town and the church building and my job description and the people and the couple that she's talking about, I knew that we were kind of in trouble there, but I also knew, I thought, okay, the Lord's teaching me something here, because in Akron we had it made, and now we're in a completely different situation. And I thought, the Lord's trying to teach me something. I mean, we did a radio program. We did different things, but we couldn't get any momentum going. We did everything we could.
Everything we knew to do.
And the man who followed me is another good friend. Did a great job. He was there for 6 years. He's now retired, but it just one of those things. What do we pray about? There's a story we could tell. We don't have time tonight, but when your mother says we have to move, I said, Lord, please provide the way.
Yeah.
And he did, almost instantly.
Yeah. Tell y'all told me this yesterday. I didn't know this. So real quick, Mom, tell how that happened. So Dad was praying, God, get me out of here, basically. Provide a way.
I wouldn't word it that way, but pretty close.
And then, Mom, what happened?
Well,
you said this was a turning point in your life.
It was a turning point in my life. We we lived in the church house. It was right next door to one of the elders' homes. And so we had been there maybe 10 months. And it was during this, maybe the spring. And we were standing out in the driveway talking with this elder. And because it was spring, we had the windows open in the house and we heard the phone ringing. And so Trav went to answer the phone and I stayed out there to talk with the elder. And then, so then he left and I was outside with you guys. You were riding your little trikes or something. And Trav came out and he had this really weird look on his face. He said, "You'll never guess who that was." And I said, "Well, who was it?" And he said, "Well, it was an elder from Ashland, Ohio." And he said that somebody had told him that we weren't real happy here, and would I be interested in coming and interviewing as the minister at their church? And I said, "Yes."
The sooner the better.
He said, "Well, we're supposed to stay here for another year." And I said, "Call the man back. Call him back." And so he did call him back, and he went and interviewed, and we went to Ashland. And for me, that was really the first time that I ever thought that God works in our lives for us.
Now, I want to cut in here real quick and say that I grew up most of my life in Ashland, Ohio. Mom was just saying that we went from there to Ashland, and Dad was the minister at the Steel Avenue Church of Christ in Ashland, Ohio for 23 years.
About 22 and a half.
All right. So about 23 years, which is a really long time for a Church of Christ minister. Most Church of Christ ministers maybe stick around 3. Is that the average? So Dad was there for 23 years. My sisters and I grew up there. And I'll say it because he wouldn't, but Dad and Mom were very effective in their ministry at the church because it grew quite a bit over your time there. I think it probably grew by
just about doubled.
Yeah, it about doubled in size. So I think they peaked out at 350 members, which is really good for a small town in Ohio. And they actually did a campaign and raised money to build a new building. So as a kid, growing up, watching my parents work, they were really good at what they did. And I thought of my parents as the best Christians in the world, right? And I thought of my parents as, the ideal marriage. And I looked at the work they did in the church, and I saw that our church was growing and a lot of good things were happening. And life was good for me in Ashland, Ohio. But somewhere around college, I remember when I was between my junior and senior year of college, Dad, you took me, we went on a vacation, and we went for a ride in the car. And that's the first time you told me that you felt like you'd made some mistakes. Okay. And you started talking about your marriage a little bit, and some regrets that you had. And I was taken by surprise, because everything that I thought about the two of you and the way things were running in Ashland, it turns out that there were some cracks. So talk about, Ashland was a blessing to you both.
Right.
You were so glad to be there. You're still glad you were there.
Right.
It was awesome for all of us. But talk about how that started to come apart for you, because it did start to come apart. And I'm not just talking to you, Dad. I'm talking to both of you because it affected you both.
Well, there's one time in our lives where that really changed our lives and changed the direction. That's when your sister Beth was born. She was born with cystic fibrosis. That she didn't cause any problems other than just a lot more work and all that. But that was a life-changing thing. We wanted to kind of throw that in there. But so far as what you're talking about, my tendency, I'm a perfectionist, and I tell people I'm a recovering legalist. But it's true. But I tended to neglect you children and neglect your mom. and I was kind of married to the church. That's a term that we sometimes use, preachers use, or it's said about us. Your mother and I got some counseling. We got a little bit, and I got my thinking straightened out. The things started getting better. Those days we had a beautiful, wonderful time, but we were raising 3 children. One needed special attention. Your mother worked, and preachers will tell you that their wives work so they can afford health insurance.
Mm-hmm.
And so your mother was just had all kind of stress, and she was pulled in so many different directions. And like you said, she was in charge of the church library, and she taught Bible classes and worked in VBS. She did that. She did it all. I don't know. She was younger then, but I know.
Yeah.
But just she did so much. And then here she's going her direction, and I'm going my direction, and you kids are all over creation, and there was just some neglect. And now, I'll take the brunt of that. I'll take all that. But we have learned that doesn't work. And I know of preacher friends who've lost their marriages, their families have been destroyed because they were married to the church instead of married to their spouses. So is that kind of what you're getting at? That's a mistake I made. I also burned out, and I blame myself for the burnout. It's my fault, 100% my fault. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, I want to hear about that, because Ashlyn, what I'm saying is that it looked really good to me, and I was raised in a legalistic church. And so my understanding was that if I do everything right, then everything is going to go right. If I follow the rules, if I obey God, then everything is going to go my way, right? Because I'm going His way.
Right.
And for my childhood, growing up, that seemed to be the case, right? Everything seemed to be working out really fine. But about the time that I was becoming an adult, I started to see cracks, right? I started to see that things were not working out as well. Mm-hmm. And that eventually led to you burning out and having to leave your job there. But I want to talk about that. I mean, when did you talked about your own legalism? When did things start to not work as well for you and Ashland? And I'll address this to Mom, because you just had a few minutes. So, like, Mom, as you were watching this and being a part of this, when did you start to feel like things were not working out quite so well, or maybe things weren't as good as they appeared?
I don't know if I can put an exact time on it. I know that the last few years we were there, your dad was so overworked. He was so overworked. The church had grown so much. We had gone to 2 services on Sunday morning. He was preaching both of those, teaching a class on Sunday morning, preaching again Sunday night. He's one that likes to do lots of Bible studies during the week. At night, he was doing those. And he was so overworked, and he was getting so worn out, just so worn out. And I had gone to one of the elders and asked if he could have a sabbatical. And that's as far as it went. Because he would never do it himself. He would never ask for it himself. So then he went into a depression. He didn't want to get out of bed in the morning. He could not think straight. He could not make a decision.
Couldn't remember anything.
He couldn't remember anything. He was just, there was just hardly anything left to him. And so he tried to fight that off himself. He didn't want to go to a doctor because he was afraid they would put him on some kind of medication, and he didn't want that. But finally he said, I've got to talk to somebody. I've got to do something. And so there was a counselor in the church about 150 miles away from us.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, make an appointment with him and let's go. And so he made an appointment with him, and I went with him. I rode down there with him, but when we got there, I didn't go in. And he said, aren't you going in with me? And I said, no, because I don't think you can really be totally honest if I'm in there. And so he went in and he saw the counselor, and I stayed out in the car. He came out about an hour later, and he once again had that kind of deer in the headlights look on his face, like he had when we got that call from Ashland that time. And I said, well, what did he say? And he said, well, he said, I am depressed. And I said, is he going to put you on medication? And he said, no. I said, oh, well, that's good. That's good. What is he going to do for you? And he said, he told me I have to quit my job. And I said, what?
Have to get out preaching.
He said, he told me I have to quit my job. And I said, well, when? And he said, in 6 months. I have to quit within 6 months. And so we went home, and he fought that. He said, I can do this. I can get over this. I do not have to quit my job. I can do this. So, okay. Well, this was the time that Michelle was in England, and we had made arrangements to swap pulpits with the minister over there in Loughborough. He was going to come to Ashland and stay for a month and live in our house, and we were going to go to England for a month and stay in his house. And Trav was going to preach there, and Mark was going to preach in Ashland. And we had worked for months to get this all arranged, and so we did it. Your dad went with the thought that I just need to get away for a month. I'll get over there for a month, and I'll be fine, and I won't have to quit my job.
Yeah.
And so we went over there, and we had a wonderful time, and the people there were lovely. And I mean, it was a great experience for us, but he preached the most bitter sermons I've ever heard come from him. And it was all coming out. All that he was feeling was coming out. I felt so sorry for those people because of these lessons, you know. And as the time got closer and closer for us to come home, he kept saying, I don't want to go home. I don't want to go back. But we did. And when we got back the next week, he resigned.
So why didn't you want to quit your job? Why were you trying to persuade yourself that you could keep doing it?
Well, part of it was, I had 3 children. I had 3 children.
You had one left at that
2 of them
point.
were gone. One was
Michelle
left.
and I were gone.
Not Michelle, but
Well,
Beth.
we still had one in college.
Well, Beth was in college, and Beth still has cystic fibrosis, and she's in college, and we need good health insurance, and we can't just pack up and leave. We have a house, we have a mortgage, we have we have bills to be paid, and there's some pride in there where, hey, I brought the church this far, and we have a building program going on here. What people need to understand, sometimes preachers get this idea that everything depends upon them. And I had this picture of the church in my mind. So I tried to play the role of preacher, elder, deacon, Bible class teacher, the whole 9 yards. I did campus ministry. I did it all. And I did senior ministry. I did it all. And and the church was doing pretty good. But what happened is that I collapsed, and everything kind of hinged on me. And that sounds like I'm not arrogant. I'm a fool for doing it this way. And God said, do the work of an evangelist, and let the elders do their job, so forth. I didn't do that. I violated what God's word teaches. And as a result, the church suffered. Oh, I suffered, yeah. But the church lost a lot of its membership. So I'm not proud of that. I'm not proud of that at all. And if I had to go back and do it again, I would not do it that way.
So was that time in your lives, was that one of the lowest points in your lives?
It seemed like it, but it was it was a growing experience, and we became more dependent upon God. And I tell you what, if you try to run on your own energy, you're going to burn out pretty cotton picking fast. And that's what I did. And I've learned that Christ is my source of strength, power. And we learned that. We learned how to walk on water, walk by faith, not by sight, and to depend totally upon him. I mean, I had no income. I had to quit. I had no income, none. and your mother's income could not make up the big difference. But he got us through that.
How did you feel about yourself during that, from the time that you started burning out?
Felt like a failure.
How did you feel about yourself? Failure against what standard?
My own standard, I guess.
Where'd you get that standard?
Well, that's the world standard. The world standard is, men need to be men, and men need to be tough and just suck it up, And that's kind of what I was thinking. I thought, man, I ought to be able to work this out. Come on, dude, you're 53 years old. You've been in ministry for X number of years. Let's get it together. And there was just no substance there. There was nothing there. I was just a shell of a man, just an empty thing, and there was just nothing to grab onto other than the Lord. And I couldn't do anything. I was paralyzed.
One of the things that he learned during this was that the minister has to be fed too.
Yeah.
And he would do Bible study, but none of it was for him. It was all for this sermon or that class or this Bible study. He wasn't getting fed. And we learned a lot.
Yeah.
We learned a lot.
Yeah.
What were your prayers like during that time in your life?
Before or after burning?
During that time in your life when you were burning out and it was all coming apart and you had to finally walk away, what were your prayers like?
That's the problem. That's the problem. Well, you answer.
No, go ahead.
That's the problem. I wasn't praying.
Why?
With Jesus, before he started the day, he always started with prayer. And I'm such a personality, I'm a type A personality. I'm making excuses here now, but I needed to get started. I need to get to work. The kids are out the door. Debbie's gone off to work. Now I can do my work. My office was at home, and so I was just constantly working and thinking and building. And I'd pray for the sick, but I wouldn't pray much for myself. That was just dumb. That's just pure stupidity and foolishness. And I thought it was selfish to pray that way anyway. But I didn't depend upon the Lord, and as a result, the rest of the story.
So you felt like a failure, and Mom, let's let you describe what was going on. Dad walked away. He quit after you came back from Loughborough. 23 years building this church, and pouring yourself into the people there. And y'all have given your life to this. And we had great times there. We loved that church.
Yeah.
Still do.
And that's not the way
do.
that any of us would have wanted it to end.
Nope.
So how were you feeling about yourselves and about your life when it was over? Now, I know you're a lot different from him, so but I'm asking you what you observed.
In a better way.
Well, my prayers at that point were for him. I wasn't concerned about the bills or the money that much because I knew God was going to take care of us. I just wanted him to get well. It was a really awkward time because we lived right down the street from the church building. We didn't feel it was right to go to church there. And so every Sunday morning we would get up and we would drive usually to Columbus, somewhere to go to church. But on Sunday nights, Wednesday nights, we did a lot of our own study. We studied what we felt like we needed. There's a book by John Ortberg called "If You Want to Walk on Water, You Got to Get Out of the Boat." We studied that book 3 times that year. And somebody else gave us a book by Stormy O'Martin called Just Enough Light for the Step I'm On. And we went through that book twice.
Wow.
Just trying to build our faith. It wasn't like we lost faith in God.
No.
We just didn't know our way. We didn't know what was going to happen next. We didn't know how long it was going to take him to get better. We didn't know what we were going to do. And so we were just we realized at that point that he hadn't been fed spiritually. We were just trying to feed, just feed.
Legalism, I shared with the group a couple weeks ago, legalism is bad news.
Mm-hmm.
Because, when you're struggling, legalism says work harder.
Mm-hmm.
If you're having problems, it must be you, because you're not pure enough in heart, or you're not thinking the right things, or you're not doing enough. And what I saw growing up was two parents who exemplified hard work for me, and doing all the right things. And I remember the last time that you and I got in an argument about something in the Bible when I was in college, which I'm sure was tame compared to the arguments you probably had with Bethy a few years later. And it was a very legalistic argument. And I told a story a few weeks ago about how I hit bottom, where I told God I hated him. I'm like, I just said, look, I think you're out. I don't think you care about me at all. So why should I even try for you? And that was the I had tried as hard as I could, and nothing I did was enough. And I was like, I give up. If I'm gonna be saved, it's got to be you, or I'm lost. So you talked about your recovering legalists. It sounds like that period in your lives where you're doing all that studying on your own might have been a period where you experienced God in a new way, or heard God in a new way. Talk about how God has changed for you. Your perception of God has changed through these experiences. Do you understand the question I'm asking?
Yeah. I grew up terrified of God. I was terrified of God. I only knew the God of the Old Testament, or what I thought was the God of the Old Testament. Now I know he's not, what I thought he was, even in the Old Testament. But I was telling you yesterday or the day before about a story that I heard in a ladies' class that Dorothy Abels told. That was the beginning for me. And she said that she had heard this joke, and she told it to us. But for me, it wasn't a joke. It was the gospel truth. And in the joke, this man dies and he goes to heaven, and Peter's at the gate. And there's a sign above the gate, and it says entrance 100 points. And so the man comes up to the gate, and Peter says, okay, tell me, about yourself. And so the man says, well, I was a member of the Church of Christ. And Peter says, that's 1 point. And the guy says, well, okay, I was an elder in the church. And Peter says, that's another point. And the guy says, well, I never missed a service. I was there every Sunday morning, every Sunday night, every Wednesday night. And Peter says, that's another point. And the guy's starting to get nervous, because he's thinking, well, I'm never going to get 100 points. And finally he says, well, aren't we saved by the blood of Jesus? And Peter says, that's 100 points. Come on in. And to me, that was eye-opening. It was not a joke. It was the truth. That was the start of me understanding grace. It really was. So now God is the God of grace. One year I took the chronological Bible. We've read that through several times, but I read it through 1 year, and I wrote down every single instance I could find about God's compassion and his grace. And the Old Testament is full of them. I never knew it. I just feel like I was so blinded by legalism. I feel like a slow learner. It's taken me a long time.
What about you, preacher?
What about me? I'm still learning. Debbie and I have done a study of the book How People Grow by Drs. Cloud and Townsend. And of course, that's in a smaller book entitled Growth Has No Boundaries. And one of the chapters is entitled God is on Your Side. I just wish someone had taught me that about 40 years ago. Things would be a lot different now. But my own preaching, what I had been taught, what I had perceived or whatever, was that God wasn't on our side, and we had to get him on our side. And the way to get God on our side is to be good and kind of have some kind of this earning salvation theology. But what I learned after burnout is that I needed to become more dependent upon God, not just for His grace, but also His power. And it's hard for a legalist to admit that he's wrong. It's hard for a legalist to admit, oh, I'm saved by grace. And it really is, but it took a while, and I'm getting more into that all the time, that we are saved by grace through faith, that not of works, lest any man should boast. I read a quote just recently where the writer says, God's not against working. He says, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. And he says, but God's against the idea of earning. And I had to get rid of that earning concept. I don't earn a thing. I can never earn a thing. And I work because I am saved by grace. That's the way I look at it now. That is so opposite of the way I was taught.
Yeah.
But I'm still in a learning curve. And so.
Let me ask you this then. Like, can you think of a time in your life when you started, like Mom heard that joke that Dorothy Abels told in class?
Yeah,
right?
I've heard that story before too.
Obviously that's really memorable for her. And can you think of a time when you Daniel's blowing bubbles in his drink. That's why we're laughing over here. When you just felt different. You know what I'm saying? So there's that time when you start to think this might be different than I thought it was, but you still feel the way you always have. But for you, Dad, for example, you talked about after you had to give up working at the church in Ashland and learning to depend on God, right? Can you think of a time in your life where you started to not feel like a legalist anymore? Like you felt different inside. You felt lighter. You felt freer. You felt better.
Probably when we moved back to Tennessee. Yeah.
Okay.
I was out of preaching for a year, did church financing for a year, visited other churches. But really, when I got back to Tennessee, my thinking was pretty much corrected, and continued to study, continue to grow, continue to learn, as we all should. And just doing this recent study has really made it even clearer for me. I've had to have other people tell me who are not members of the Church of Christ what's what, and that's really hard to stomach and swallow too, because when I was younger, I preached against these people, you know. But it's coming clearer and clearer and clearer, and it's okay to say it. We're saved by grace through faith. That even sounds biblical. Well, it is biblical. It's Ephesians chapter 2, 8 and 9. So, yeah. Does that answer your question pretty much?
It's your answer. That's your
right.
answer. What about you, Mom? Is there, like, did you, when you heard what Dorothy said in class, did you from that point on be like, something feels different about the world? Or was it something you grew into until one day you looked around and you're like, I'm different than I was a few years ago?
It's been a more of a gradual growing thing for me. I mean, that joke was the beginning. Okay, planted the seed, but it's been more of a growing, gradual thing for me. Doing that study that I just mentioned that year, where I wrote down all of the times that God is mentioned as compassionate and gracious, and seeing how many of them are in the Old Testament. I mean, that's His name, you know. That was a real turning point for me.
Would you, if I asked you to tell me what was the darkest time in your life together, was there a time that you were kind of in it, that you arrived at together?
I think your dad's cancer probably was the darkest.
Yeah. It's surreal to be sitting in a chair and a doctor comes in and he jumps on his little stool that has wheels on it and wheels up right into your face and says, I have some really new, he said, I have some bad news for you. And I thought, okay, this guy's joking around. He said, no, I have some really, really bad news for you. And then he told me what the cancer was and where it was. You know, it's surreal. You're numb. And that was a dark time. I don't want to go there again. But it was a tremendous time for growth. Tremendous time. Total dependence, because we have no control, none. It is over. There's no control. And you have to depend upon him totally. That's what we did. And
well, and sometimes it takes something like that to finally learn that you never did have any control.
Yeah. I tell people I'm a very slow learner, and I'm a little hard-headed and proud, and God just kind of chips away. You know, and I'm at 70 years old, and he's still chipping away. And thank God for his patience. Mm-hmm. But that was a dark time. It was a very dark time. When your sister was born with CF, I struggled with that, but we came on out of that. The Lord provided for her and provided for us. This cancer thing is you're out of control. You have no control. Mm-hmm. You thought, what do we do next? What do we do next? The brethren helped a lot. The Lord provided everything we needed and more.
Yeah.
And I'm still sitting here. I'm sitting here by his grace, by the prayers of the church, by this woman sitting beside me. And I don't have these in any particular order, by the way. She was with me the whole time. And then, of course, Vanderbilt. I mean, God brings it all together. He always brings it together.
He worked it all
You can
out.
tell it's his deal because you're just sitting there and it just falls together. You go, wow.
He worked it all out.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's the God that I serve. And so I wake up every morning. If I can open my eyes and see the sunlight, I'm very thankful just to be alive. And I'm able to see because this disease takes your eyesight. And anyway, he's in control.
If you could go back to, let's say, the time in your life where things were starting to fall apart in Ashland, right? You were starting to pay the bills for your determination to make it work yourself and to, Travis and Debbie get in a time machine, you go back to that time in your life, you get out of the time machine and you confront yourselves then in that moment. What would you say to yourselves?
You first.
See, we probably would not agree on the same moment to start with.
That's okay. Make it your moment then.
I don't know if I can do that. I mean, I can remember many times having discussions with your dad about you're doing too much. You're doing too much.
Yep.
I don't know if you remember when we started having family night on Tuesday nights. That I insisted on that. Your dad fought that.
Really?
And nail.
I didn't know that.
Because that took away a night for him to go out and do Bible study.
Dad fought family night.
But I said, look, these are your kids too. Mm-hmm. And I said, what good is it going to do if you save the souls of the whole world and lose the souls of your children? Mm-hmm. You got to be a part of this. And, I mean, I tried for a long time to try to get him to step back, and I just finally quit because I knew it wasn't going to do any good. It was making him miserable. It was keeping me angry, and so I just quit. I thought there's no point in doing this. I'm wasting my breath. So I can't say that there's a time that I would go back to.
Well, I mean, if you could go back, that sounded like a bitter quit and not a happy quit.
It wasn't a happy quit. Yeah. It was a I can't control it.
Right.
So don't try thing.
So what I'm asking is everything you've learned about God and about God's relationship with you that you're sharing right now in the present moment, if you could get in a time machine and go back and talk to yourself in the moment of crisis.
Knowing what we know now?
Yeah. Say, Debbie, I'm from the future. I'm you,
back to the future.
In the future. And I'm here. I have a message for you from your future. I know you're going through some really bad stuff right now.
I don't know that I can answer that. I'm
Mom,
sorry.
you're ruining my class.
Let him answer it.
He
sitting here shaking
deferred to
his
you.
head.
He was trying to.
He's
he was
trying to get time to
st-
think.
Yeah, I know.
Ask him. He's
He was
had it.
using you as a stall.
That's right. Well, the thing about it, I had 3 men come to me and tell me the same thing their mother told me. And I listened to those guys, but I didn't listen to your mother. And that was a horrible mistake. And sometimes men get this crazy idea that women don't know what they're talking about. They do.
Imagine that.
Imagine that. And I didn't listen to her, and I didn't listen to the men, and I paid the price. But if I can't change the past, but I can help people now not make the same foolish mistakes that I made. And that's all I can do. I can't go back and change the past, but
yeah.
I wish I did. I tell people now the most important thing you can do in your life is have a personal relationship with the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about rules. Rules give structure. I'm not against rules because God's not against rules. There's lots of them in the Bible, but they're for our good. But God is all about relationship, and sometimes I forgot that. And relationships are hard. They take time and energy and effort. And I just didn't want that. I didn't want to fool with that. That's a waste of time. Let's get this other stuff done. And you know the result. You know the rest of the story.
So, how does God feel about you?
He's always felt the same about me before I was born, before I was conceived. His feelings have never changed. He's always loved me unconditionally and totally. End of story. And I can live with that because I need that. And so that's he's always loved me that way. That will never change. Never. No matter how bad I get or how good I get, he will always love me unconditionally.
Would any of you like to ask my parents any questions?
No, you didn't say you were going to do that.
It's bedtime. Sorry.
I just want to give anyone who has a question for you a chance to. It's 8:00, so I've asked all of my questions. What questions might you have for these wise people to my right?
Wow.
All right.
We wowed him.
I'll tell you, confession time is hard on first people like me.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to say that I took the medicine.
Okay.
When I went and met with my doctor, I ended up with medicine.
Hey, whatever it takes, bro. I'm with you. I understand.
There's a lot in there that I could relate to, brother.
Mm-hmm.
And Debbie, man, y'all, that's the real deal.
Yeah.
There's
Preachers are idealists, and they want what's best, and they think they're the person to get it done.
Yep. God, ain't you glad I'm on your
forget-
side?
Forget about the Lord and the bride. Yeah, absolutely.
By the way, because my parents are retiring this year, my dad is 70 years old. And so because he's retiring this year and mom is retiring this year, I have started a podcast where I'm interviewing my dad and I'm asking him to tell me about his life decade by decade. But I'm asking him to share his wisdom that he's learned by living through each decade, particularly as a minister working in the church. So the first one is out, and then we're gonna go through the decades of Dad's life, and I'm hoping to get to Mom too. So when I'm done with Dad, but if you want to hear more from this guy, the podcast is called Dad's Decades, and it's on every major podcasting service. So yeah, there's more of this guy. It's just me asking questions, but it's all him talking and sharing his wisdom. So if you like this, there's more where that came from. And if there aren't any other questions,
Thanks for tuning in.
yeah, I want to thank you all for spending a Wednesday night with the Irwin family. And Dad, Mom, thank you for sharing so much of yourselves with my church family here in Michigan. And there are things I'd like to say, but I would become I would ugly cry. So
Well, we don't want that.
my parents are still the greatest influence on my life, and they're a greater influence because of the mistakes they've made and the things they've gone through than all the things I thought they were doing right when I was a kid. So I've learned more from them, and I hold them in higher esteem now, knowing them as adults, than I did when I was a kid, and they could do no wrong. So it's a real honor to me to get to ask you these questions, and
Well, we feel honored.
yeah, let you share them.
Thank you.
And that's what we got. Malchiah Newman is next week. The Gospel according to Malchiah Newman. And Adam, if you have any announcements or prayer that you'd like to lead, then I'll turn it over to you.
All right. I want to say thank you again, Travis and Debbie, to y'all for sharing this. Brad, thanks for sharing them with us, and for the story they've told. We're looking forward to reopening Sunday, this coming Sunday. And so hopefully we'll see some of you there. Let's go ahead and go to God in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for loving us and for choosing us. God, we thank you for your grace, the way that you give us life, you sustain our life, you bless our life, you enrich our life, and you carry us to life everlasting. God, we are yours. And I pray that you will please help us to get out of that mindset that says we have to live as if we were earning your blessing, but instead give us a heart to know that we live from your blessing as your children, and help us to reach others with that good news that in Christ they too are loved and chosen, and that you want them too to live from your blessing. God, I pray, thank you for the witness of your servants, and may we listen. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you and good night.
God bless y'all. Have a good night.
God
Thanks,
bless.
y'all.
Night.
Thank you.